On a winter morning in January 2010, a housekeeper unlocked the door of a guest house on Mulholland Drive in Los Angeles. Inside, she found something that would make headlines around the world. Casey Johnson, heiress to one of America's greatest fortunes, lay dead at 30 years old. She had been there for days, alone, forgotten. Her body discovered not by family, not by friends, but by hired help. The coroner would later determine she died from diabetic ketoacidosis, a treatable condition. Had anyone been watching? Had anyone cared? But in the final chapter of her short, turbulent life, Casey Johnson had been cut off from the family fortune, estranged from her billionaire father, and stripped of custody of her 3-year-old adopted daughter. The great-great-granddaughter of the man who gave the world Band-Aids and baby powder had died in conditions that newspapers would later describe as squalor. This was not how the story was supposed to end. Not for a Johnson. But if you trace the bloodline back through 5 generations of this American dynasty, you will find something darker than tragedy. You will find a pattern, scandal after scandal, death after death, betrayal woven into the very fabric of their fortune. The mansions they built, magnificent castles of stone and ambition, became stages for drama that would make Shakespeare wince. This is the story of the Johnson and Johnson family, the buildings that bore witness to their triumphs and their destruction, and the curse that seemed to follow their wealth like a shadow that could never be outrun. The brothers who changed medicine. To understand the curse, we must first understand the blessing. We must travel back to the 1880s, to a small factory on the 4th floor of a building in New Brunswick, New Jersey. There, 3 brothers were about to change the world. Robert Wood Johnson was born on February 20th, 1845, in Carbondale, Pennsylvania, the 8th of 11 children in a family that knew struggle intimately. His father was a farmer. His mother raised the children in modest circumstances that taught young Robert the value of every penny earned. At just 16, Robert left home to apprentice at his uncle's pharmacy in Poughkeepsie, New York. It was there, among the jars of medicine and rolls of crude bandages, that he discovered his calling. In an era when surgery often meant death by infection, when wounds festered and doctors had no reliable way to prevent contamination, Robert Wood Johnson began to dream of something better. He studied the revolutionary theories of Joseph Lister, the British surgeon who championed antiseptic practices. Lister had discovered that carbolic acid could kill the invisible germs that caused deadly infections. But the medical establishment was slow to embrace his ideas. Robert Wood Johnson saw an opportunity. In 1874, Robert partnered with George Seabury to form Seabury and Johnson, manufacturing medicated plasters and surgical supplies. But disagreements arose, as they often do when money and ego collide. By 1880, Robert had sold his shares and was legally barred from the medical supply business for 10 years. His brothers, James Wood Johnson and Edward Meade Johnson, were not bound by such restrictions. They began their own venture, struggling to stay afloat with insufficient capital and fierce competition. When Robert's non-compete period ended, he rejoined his brothers with fresh funding and fresh ambition. Johnson & Johnson was officially born. The company started with just 14 workers in that 4th-floor factory. They manufactured prepackaged surgical dressings, each one sterile, each one revolutionary. For the first time, doctors could trust that the bandages they applied wouldn't kill their patients. The timing was perfect. Hospitals were expanding, medical practices were modernizing, and the 3 Johnson brothers were positioned at the center of a healthcare revolution. By the time Robert Wood Johnson died on February 7, 1910, The company had grown from 14 workers to 40 buildings. The fortune he left behind would be valued at $2 million, an enormous sum for that era. But more importantly, he left behind sons who would multiply that wealth beyond imagination. And with that wealth would come the darkness. The general takes command. When Robert Wood Johnson died, his oldest son was only 17 years old. Robert Wood Johnson II, known to the family simply as Bobby and later as the General, had been urged by his mother to attend college. But young Bobby had other plans. He dropped out of school and took an entry-level job at his father's company, starting in the powerhouse where the steam engines hummed. It was a strategic decision that would define his character. Bobby wanted to learn the business from the ground up. He moved from department to department, mastering every aspect of operations. By 22, he was a department head. By the time World War I erupted, he was general superintendent of manufacturing. Bobby was ambitious in ways his father had never been. Where the founder had been content to build a successful company, his son dreamed of empire. He expanded into new markets, developed new products, and transformed Johnson & Johnson from a family business into an international corporation. During World War II, Bobby's administrative skills caught the attention of President Franklin Roosevelt. He was commissioned as a brigadier general and appointed chairman of the smaller War Plants Corporation, overseeing military contracts for thousands of companies. The title general would follow him back to civilian life, a badge of honor he wore proudly. But the general ruled his family with the same iron discipline he applied to business. His treatment of his children would sow seeds of resentment that would poison the dynasty for generations. The general had 3 children from 2 marriages. His first son, Robert Wood Johnson III, known as Bobby Jr., grew up largely ignored. When the general deigned to notice him at all, it was often to criticize. He called his son weak. He called him obese. He predicted, with the casual cruelty of a man who believed himself infallible, that Bobby Jr. would never amount to anything. The prophecy became self-fulfilling. Bobby Jr. worked at Johnson & Johnson, rising briefly to the presidency in 1961. But within 4 years, his own father fired him. The general, it seemed, could not tolerate any threat to his control, even from his own blood. The other children fared no better. The general's brother Seward, a man of weak character and self-indulgent habits, followed his older siblings' every command. Together, the 2 brothers controlled 84% of Johnson & Johnson stock. To avoid taxes and secure the fortune for future generations, the general established trusts for his offspring and those of his brother Seward. Each trust contained 15,000 shares of Johnson & Johnson stock, then valued at approximately $500,000. Those trusts would grow into billions, and they would tear the family apart. Merriewold Castle, the House of Secrets. In 1924, Seward Johnson, the general's weaker brother, built a castle. He called it Merriewold, meaning merry wilderness, and it rose from a magnificent bluff overlooking the Raritan River in Highland Park, New Jersey. The castle was a wedding gift for his first wife, Ruth Dill, sister of actress Diana Dill and aunt to future movie star Michael Douglas. The design was deliberately theatrical. Limestone and sandstone walls embedded with fossils, plaster reliefs of whales, lobsters, and sea creatures decorating the exterior. 150 leaded glass windows catching the light. 11 fireplaces to warm the 25 rooms. Ramparts and turrets that made visitors feel they had stepped into medieval Europe. But the most peculiar features were hidden from casual observation. secret staircases built into the walls, a liquor cabinet concealed behind a swinging bookshelf, perfect for the Prohibition era. Rooms designed for privacy, for secrets, for the things that wealthy families prefer to keep from the world. Above the breakfast room fireplace, craftsmen carved the zodiac signs of Seward, Ruth, and their daughter Mary Leah, Leo, Libra, and Cancer. It was meant to symbolize family unity. Instead, it would become an ironic monument to dysfunction. Nothing was merry about life in Merriewold. Seward Johnson was, by all accounts, a deeply troubled man. While the general obsessed over business and control, Seward obsessed over his own desires, regardless of who they hurt. His sexual nature, according to those who knew him, exceeded the bounds of even the most dedicated philanderer. The secrets he created within the castle walls would isolate his children, not only from him, but from each other. Decades later, his daughter Mary Leah would make a shocking accusation. She would claim that over a period of years, from the time she was 9 until she was 15, her father had sexually molested her within those castle walls. The accusation would divide the family. Some believed her. Others, including her own sons, thought she was delusional or seeking revenge. The truth, buried beneath layers of wealth and silence, may never be fully known. What is certain is that the castle witnessed more than molestation. In 1932, just weeks after the infamous Lindbergh baby kidnapping shocked the nation, an intruder came to Merrywald with a similar plan. Diana Johnson, Seward and Ruth's third daughter, was just months old. The intruder had robbed the Johnsons once before. Now he returned with darker intentions, but unlike the Lindbergh tragedy, this attempt failed. Seward Johnson heard the commotion and grabbed his gun. He shot the would-be kidnapper in the leg as the man fell from his ladder. Police arrested him later. The newspapers ran headlines comparing it to the Lindbergh case, but with a happier ending. The castle had protected its occupants this time. Ruth Dill divorced Seward in 1937, citing extreme indifference. She was granted custody of the children and ownership of Merrywald. She would live there, in the smaller carriage house rather than the main castle, until her death in 1987. Seward remarried and moved away, leaving behind a house full of memories he preferred to forget. But the castle's dark history was far from over. In the 1960s, industrial engineer Charles Farmer and his wife Barbara moved into the main building. Their marriage, like so many before it in those halls, deteriorated into hatred. Charles accused Barbara of having an affair. He claimed she was building an occult center for practicing black magic in Massachusetts. On a night in 1963, Charles Farmer shot and killed his wife Barbara in one of Merrywald's 25 rooms. He then turned the gun on himself, but survived. The newspapers ran new headlines about the cursed castle on the bluff. Today, Merrywald still stands. It serves as the headquarters for a real estate development company, its dark past scrubbed clean by commerce. A bronze sculpture by Seward Johnson, Jr., one of the children raised in those haunted halls, sits in the courtyard. It depicts a life-size man reading a newspaper. Perhaps he is reading about the headlines the castle once generated. The baby on the powder can. Of all the children who grew up in Merrywald, none carried more visible weight than Mary Leah Johnson. Her face became famous before she could walk, immortalized on millions of Johnson's baby powder containers sold around the world. The pink-cheeked infant with the innocent smile became the symbol of everything Johnson & Johnson represented. Purity, care, protection. But behind the image lay a reality far darker than any marketing executive could have imagined. Mary Leah later claimed that the sexual abuse began when she was 9. Her father, she said, came to her at night in Merriewold Castle. The abuse continued until she was 15, around the time her parents divorced. Whether these memories were accurate, fabricated, or distorted by time and trauma remains disputed. What is certain is that Mary Leah Johnson lived a turbulent life. She married 4 times. Her third husband, Dr. Victor Dark, was a psychiatrist she met while seeking treatment for her son's drug addiction. Their relationship became a nightmare. In 1976, Mary Leah publicly declared that her estranged husband and his homosexual lover had hired hitmen to have her murdered. She was living at the time with her 4th husband-to-be, the gay Broadway producer Marty Richards. Together, they hired bodyguards to protect them. The protection proved necessary. During a break-in at their home, a bodyguard was beaten almost to death. Mary Leah and Marty barely escaped with their lives. The Bronx District Attorney's Office opened an investigation. No charges were ever brought. Mary Leah divorced Victor Dark in 1978 and married Marty Richards, a union that would last until her death. With Richards, she became a Broadway producer herself, helping to finance films like The Shining and Fort Apache, The Bronx, and Tony Award-winning productions like Sweeney Todd. Her financial troubles never ended, despite her immense trust fund. In the 1960s, she sued her own father, Seward Johnson Sr., in an effort to extract more money from the family trust. The lawsuit failed, but it poisoned whatever relationship remained between them. Throughout her life, the once healthy baby on the powder container abused alcohol and drugs. She suffered from depression and paranoia. She traveled with bodyguards everywhere she went. The face that had symbolized innocence became a mask for pain. Mary Leah Johnson Richards died on May 3, 1990, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. She was 63 years old. The cause was complications from her various health problems, but those who knew her believed she had been dying slowly for decades, poisoned by the very wealth that was supposed to protect her. Jasna Polana, the $50 million battleground. While Mary Leah struggled with her demons, her father, Seward Johnson Sr., was building a new monument to excess. By the early 1970s, Seward had divorced his second wife, Esther Underwood, after 32 years of marriage. He was 76 years old, wealthy beyond measure, and restless for something new. He found it in an unlikely place. Barbara Piasecka was a 31-year-old Polish immigrant who arrived in America in 1968 with $100 in her pocket and a master's degree in art history from the University of Wrocław. She found work as a cook in the household of Seward Johnson and his wife Esther. She was terrible at cooking. Her employers switched her to housework, where she proved more capable. But something else caught Seward's attention. One morning, as he cut through the kitchen on his way to his office, he saw the attractive new maid and stopped. "My wife told me we have a pretty cook," he said pleasantly, while Esther stood not far away. "I'm Mr. Johnson. I hope you will be happy here." Within a year, Barbara was no longer just a maid. She had noticed Seward's growing art collection and casually remarked that he had overpaid for one painting because it was not by the master, but by his disciple. She proved her claim using dates and artistic technique. Seward was stunned by her knowledge. He appointed her as consultant to his art purchases, paying her $12,000 a year. But their relationship quickly became more than professional. Seward set Barbara up in an apartment in Manhattan. Then he moved in with her. In 1971, 8 days after his divorce from Esther was finalized, 76-year-old Seward Johnson married 34-year-old Barbara Piasecka. None of his 6 children attended the wedding. The newlyweds decided they needed a home befitting their combined passions for art and grandeur. They found a 140-acre property between Princeton and Lawrenceville, New Jersey, with rolling hills, meadows, and bridle paths. They paid $1 million for it. Then they hired Wallace K. Harrison, one of America's most celebrated architects, designer of the United Nations headquarters and the Metropolitan Opera House at Lincoln Center. The instruction was simple: build the biggest and best house in the world. What rose from those rolling hills would become one of the most expensive private residences in America. They called it Jasna Polana, Polish for bright glade, a name that echoed both Barbara's heritage and Leo Tolstoy's Russian estate. The mansion covered more than 50,000 square feet, yet it contained only 2 bedrooms. Barbara wanted space for art, not guests. What it did have were 32 bathrooms, 15 fireplaces, 1 wine cellar, 1 art cellar, and an air-conditioned doghouse. The construction cost exceeded $30 million. Every detail was chosen by Barbara herself, often overriding the famous architect who eventually removed his name from the project in frustration. When the mansion was completed in 1978, the Johnsons threw an opening party and invited the world's elite. President Jimmy Carter declined. So did Energy Secretary Cyrus Vance, Walter Cronkite, Anne Morrow Lindbergh, and dozens of other luminaries. Barbara scrambled to find lesser celebrities to fill the empty seats. The house that was meant to announce their arrival in society had become a monument to isolation. Within its walls, Seward and Barbara lived largely alone, surrounded by priceless Flemish tapestries, paintings by Raphael and Rembrandt, drawings by Fra Angelico and Botticelli, and 18th-century furniture imported from the greatest estates of Europe. They employed dozens of servants to maintain the property, but they rarely entertained. As Seward grew older and frailer, Barbara's control over his life became absolute. His 6 children watched from the outside, increasingly alarmed at what they saw. Their father, they believed, was being manipulated by a woman who had risen from maid to mistress, to billionaire's wife in just a few short years. In 1982, when Seward was 87 years old, he signed a new will. It left virtually his entire estate, worth more than $400 million, to Barbara. His 6 children, 4 from his first marriage and 2 from his second, were largely excluded. Only one child, his namesake Seward Johnson Jr., received a specific bequest. Seward Johnson Sr. died on May 23, 1983, and then the war began. The will contest. The trial that followed became the largest, costliest, ugliest, and most spectacular will contest in American history. Seward Johnson Jr., the eldest child and noted sculptor, led his 5 siblings in a legal assault on their stepmother. Their allegations were explosive. They claimed their father had been mentally incompetent when he signed the final will. They accused Barbara of undue influence, of isolating an elderly man from his family, of coercing him into betraying his own blood. Trial witnesses painted a devastating picture. Barbara, they testified, often physically and emotionally abused her husband. She flew into rages over trivial matters. She controlled his access to his children. She convinced him that his own offspring were unworthy of his love or his money. Barbara denied everything. She described herself as a devoted wife who had cared for her husband through 12 years of marriage. She had transformed their lives with art and culture. She had given him companionship in his final years. The trial lasted 15 weeks. Witnesses paraded before the court, some supporting the children, others defending Barbara. The press feasted on every salacious detail. A maid who became a billionaire, a family torn apart by greed, secrets that should have stayed buried. In the end, there was no verdict. On June 2, 1986, just one day before the case was to go to the jury, both sides reached a settlement. Barbara would keep $350 million and Jasna Polana with all its contents. The 6 children would split $42 million, approximately $7 million each. The Harbor Branch Foundation, an oceanographic research center Seward had founded, received $20 million. Both sides claimed victory, but the celebrations revealed the truth. Judge Marie Lambert and several jurors attended the party hosted by the Johnson children, not the one hosted by Barbara. The maid who had married into billions kept her fortune, but she lost any hope of acceptance by the family whose name she had taken. Barbara Piasecka Johnson spent most of her remaining years in Europe, keeping homes in Monaco, Poland, and Italy. She returned to Jasna Polana only occasionally, staying in a private suite within the mansion she had designed. In 1998, she converted the estate into a luxury golf course, hiring legendary player Gary Player to design the course and Princeton architect Michael Graves to transform the clubhouse. She never remarried. She devoted herself to philanthropy, creating the Barbara Piasecka Johnson Foundation to assist students and professionals from Poland. When she died on April 1, 2013, in Wrocław, Poland, she left behind an art collection that Christie's would auction for hundreds of millions of dollars. The mansion she built to house her treasures is now a country club where corporate executives pay tens of thousands of dollars for membership. The art is gone. The woman is gone. Only the building remains, a monument to a marriage that began in a kitchen and ended in court. Lightning Tree Farm, the 5-time bride. While the will contest consumed headlines in the 1980s, another branch of the Johnson family was creating scandals of its own. Elizabeth Ross Johnson, known to everyone as Libet, was the granddaughter of the General Robert Wood Johnson II. Her father was Bobby Jr., the son the General had fired and humiliated. Her mother was Betty Wold Johnson, a doctor's daughter from Minnesota, who had married into wealth she never fully understood. Libet's childhood was marked by tragedy that struck without warning. In 1975, her brother Keith died from a cocaine overdose at 27. His body was found with drug paraphernalia near his nude form. Within months, her other brother, Willard, known as Billy, was killed in a motorcycle accident at 23. He flew over the handlebars and impaled himself on an iron picket fence. The Johnson family trusts had a provision that when any child died without issue, their share would be divided among surviving siblings. Keith and Billy had no children. Their deaths made Libet, her brother Woody, and her brother Christopher among the wealthiest members of their generation. By some estimates, each would become billionaires. But money could not buy Libet happiness. She married 5 times, collecting husbands the way her ancestors collected mansions. She dated famous men, including singer Michael Bolton and celebrity hairdresser Frederick Fekkai. She appeared constantly in gossip columns, her romantic life providing endless material for tabloid writers. Her real passion was real estate. Libet accumulated properties across the country with the fervor of an addict. In New York City, she purchased the Vanderbilt Mansion, a 12,000-square-foot townhouse on the Upper East Side that she would eventually list for $55 million. In Millbrook, New York, 90 miles north of Manhattan, she assembled what would become her masterpiece. Lightning Tree Farm began with a purchase in 1980. Over the following decades, Libet bought surrounding parcels until the estate covered more than 600 acres of Hudson Valley countryside. The main house, a Greek Revival mansion built around 1850, grew to 18,000 square feet under her ownership. Inside were 9 bedrooms, 9 bathrooms, 8 fireplaces, an elevator, a wine cellar, a dog room, a home theater, and a children's playroom, complete with a stage featuring electronic curtains. Outside were custom fountains, a swimming pool with a full kitchen in the pool house, an 18-stall horse stable with a riding ring, and multiple guest houses. Most remarkably, the estate included a private helipad, one of the only ones permitted on private property in Dutchess County. The commute to Manhattan was just 40 minutes by air. For Libet, the helicopter ride was simply part of daily life, but even 600 acres could not contain her restlessness. Libet's marriages produced 4 children, but her relationships produced mostly drama. In 2006, her niece Casey Johnson gave an explosive interview to Vanity Fair, accusing her aunt Libet of seducing Casey's boyfriend. The accusation tore through whatever family bonds remained. Casey's father, Woody, Libet's brother, reportedly wanted nothing more to do with the whole situation. The generation-skipping trust that had made them all wealthy had also made them strangers. Libet Johnson died on a weekend in June 2017, after a long period of seclusion. The cause was complications from Alzheimer's disease. She was 66 years old. Her final years had been spent largely alone, her legendary social life reduced to silence. After her death, her family began selling off the empire she had assembled. Lightning Tree Farm went on the market for $28.5 million. The Vanderbilt Mansion was listed for $55 million, then reduced, then converted to a rental at $95,000 per month. The woman who had collected properties now exists only in deeds and tax records. The houses that defined her life have passed to strangers. The ambassador and his lost daughter of all Libet's siblings, her brother Woody, achieved the most public success. Robert Wood Johnson IV, known universally as Woody, followed a path his ancestors would have understood. He worked hard. He invested wisely. He used the family fortune not to destroy himself, but to build something new. In 2000, Woody purchased the New York Jets football franchise for $635 million. It was a statement of arrival, proof that the Johnson name still commanded respect in the corridors of American power. Under his ownership, the Jets appeared in 2 AFC championship games and captured an AFC East title. Woody also threw himself into philanthropy. He founded the Alliance for Lupus Research, an organization devoted to finding a cure for the autoimmune disease. He served as chairman of the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation. He gave millions to causes he believed in. In 2017, President Donald Trump nominated Woody Johnson to serve as United States Ambassador to the United Kingdom. The appointment was controversial, as such appointments often are. But Woody weathered the criticism and took up residence in London, representing his country at the Court of St. James. From the outside, Woody Johnson had escaped the curse. He was wealthy, successful, respected. He had a wife, a family, a purpose. But the curse was patient. It was waiting in Los Angeles. Casey Johnson was born on September 24, 1979, the daughter of Woody Johnson and his first wife, Sale Johnson. She grew up on Manhattan's Upper East Side, attending the exclusive Chapin School alongside Paris and Nikki Hilton. Her classmates included heiresses, socialites, and the children of the most powerful families in America. At 8 years old, Casey was diagnosed with juvenile diabetes. The disease would shadow her for the rest of her short life, requiring constant monitoring, regular insulin injections, and careful attention to her health. But careful attention was not Casey Johnson's style. She dropped out of Brown University during her freshman year to intern with publicist Lizzie Grubman, a woman who would later gain notoriety for backing her SUV into a crowd at a Southampton nightclub. Casey was present when that incident occurred. Her life became a tabloid staple. Relationships with women, including the daughter of former Yahoo CEO Terry Semel, feuds with former friends, accusations of theft, arrests for burglary. The golden handcuffs of her inheritance, she once said, kept her trapped. In 2007, Casey adopted a daughter from Kazakhstan, naming her Ava Monroe as a tribute to Marilyn Monroe, her idol. For a brief moment, motherhood seemed to offer hope for redemption. But by 2009, Casey's life had spiraled completely out of control. Her family cut off her trust fund, demanding she get help before she could access her fortune again. Her mother, Sale, took custody of 3-year-old Ava after investigators found Casey living in squalor. Shortly after, Casey was arrested on grand theft charges for allegedly stealing clothing and jewelry from an ex-girlfriend's apartment. In November 2009, Casey became engaged to Tila Tequila, a bisexual reality television personality known for her MTV show A Shot at Love. The engagement was announced on Twitter. The mainstream media treated it as a joke. Within weeks, Casey would be dead. Her body was discovered on January 4, 2010, by a housekeeper at a guest house where she had been staying on Mulholland Drive. She had been dead for at least 2 days, possibly longer. No one had checked on her. No one had called. The Los Angeles County coroner determined the cause of death: diabetic ketoacidosis, a serious complication of untreated diabetes. Casey had failed to take her insulin. Whether this was intentional or simply negligent, no one could say. She was 30 years old. The great-great-granddaughter of the man who founded a healthcare empire died from a condition that proper medical care could have prevented. The irony was too bitter to contemplate. Her father, Woody, released a statement through a publicist, asking for privacy during a difficult time. He did not attend her memorial service. According to some family members, father and daughter had not spoken in years. Tila Tequila took to Twitter to express her grief. "Everyone please pray for my wifey Casey Johnson," she wrote. "She has passed away." Within hours, more than 5,000 tweets about Casey flooded the internet. Paris Hilton, Casey's childhood friend, tweeted, "God has another angel by his side. Casey, we all love and miss you." The angels, it seemed, were collecting Johnsons. The houses that remain, what survives when a dynasty crumbles? The buildings endure. Jasna Polana still stands in Princeton, New Jersey. It's 50,000 square feet, now serving wealthy golfers who pay handsomely for the privilege of playing Gary Player's championship course. The mansion that cost $30 million to build and caused a $400 million legal battle is now a clubhouse. Wedding parties pose for photographs in rooms where Barbara Piasecka once displayed her Rembrandts. Merriewold Castle still rises above the Raritan River in Highland Park, its turrets and ramparts now serving as corporate offices. The secret staircases remain, though the secrets they once protected are long forgotten. A modern apartment complex occupies the grounds behind the castle, home to tenants who may not know they sleep in the shadow of a house where a man shot his wife and where an heiress claims she was molested by her father. Lightning Tree Farm has been subdivided and sold. The helipad that once ferried Libet Johnson to Manhattan now serves new owners. The Greek Revival Mansion awaits whoever can afford its $13 million price tag. The Johnson & Johnson headquarters in New Brunswick, New Jersey, occupies modern office buildings, far from the fourth-floor factory where three brothers once manufactured sterile bandages. The company they built is worth hundreds of billions of dollars. Their names appear on hospitals, universities, and philanthropic foundations across the country. But the family itself has scattered. The trusts that the general created in the 1940s continue to generate wealth for his descendants. Yet that wealth has brought more tragedy than triumph. Drug overdoses, fatal accidents, suicide attempts, murder, alleged incest, will contests that revealed dysfunction no amount of money could cure. Some would call it a curse. The superstitious might point to the fortune's origins in blood and bandages, in the wounds of surgery patients, in the pain that the company's products were meant to heal. Perhaps there is something in that connection between healing and harm, between the antiseptic cleanliness of the business and the festering wounds of the family. Others would point to simpler explanations: too much money, given too young, to people who never had to earn it. Parenting that ranged from neglectful to abusive. A culture of secrecy that allowed problems to fester until they became catastrophes. The isolation that comes with extreme wealth, cutting family members off from the ordinary connections that sustain most people. Whatever the explanation, the pattern is undeniable. Generation after generation, the Johnson fortune has consumed those who inherited it. The mansions they built stand as monuments not to success, but to the failure of success to bring happiness. The legacy of stone and sorrow stand today at the gates of any Johnson estate, and you will see what money can build. Massive structures of limestone and brick, gardens landscaped by the finest designers, features that most people can only dream of, from private helipads to 50-foot ballrooms. But look closer, and you will see something else. You will see the cracks in the foundations, the overgrown gardens of properties no one wants to maintain, the for sale signs that appear with increasing frequency. The Johnson & Johnson Company continues to thrive, producing the baby powder and Band-Aids that made the family name synonymous with healthcare. But the family itself has become synonymous with something darker: the high cost of inherited wealth. Casey Johnson's daughter Ava grows up somewhere, removed from the spotlight that consumed her mother. The various branches of the family have retreated into privacy, their disputes now handled by lawyers rather than headlines. The will contests have largely concluded, the estates distributed, the mansions sold or converted to other purposes. What remains is the story. A story of brothers who revolutionized medicine, of a general who built an empire but destroyed his family, of children who inherited fortunes they could not handle, of mansions that became prisons, of bodies found alone in rooms where servants were more attentive than blood relatives. The Johnson & Johnson Corporation's famous credo, written by the general himself in 1943, declares that the company's first responsibility is to the doctors, nurses, and patients who use its products. Its second responsibility is to its employees. Its third responsibility is to the communities it serves. Only its fourth responsibility is to its stockholders. The family that wrote that credo seems to have forgotten one responsibility entirely: to each other. When historians write about American dynasties, they often focus on the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, the Vanderbilts. These families built libraries, universities, and museums that served the public good generations after the founders died. Their wealth, however tainted by the methods used to accumulate it, ultimately enriched society. The Johnsons built something different. They built mansions that became mausoleums, They created trusts that bred entitlement rather than enterprise. They produced heirs who achieved notoriety rather than accomplishment. Perhaps that is the true curse of the Johnson fortune. Not some supernatural force seeking revenge for profits made from human suffering, but something simpler and sadder. The failure of each generation to learn from the mistakes of the last. The general treated his children with contempt, and they grew up broken. His son Seward treated his children even worse, and they grew up shattered. The pattern repeated itself through marriages, divorces, addictions, and early deaths, each generation passing its wounds to the next, like a hereditary disease. The mansions they built were supposed to represent triumph. Instead, they represent the opposite. They are monuments to the proposition that you can have everything and still end up with nothing. That you can build the biggest house in America and still die alone. That you can inherit $1 billion and still wind up desperate, addicted, and abandoned in a guest house on Mulholland Drive. The stones of Jasna Polana and Merriewold Castle and Lightning Tree Farm will outlast everyone who lived in them. But the stories they contain, the secrets whispered in their corridors, the tears shed in their bedrooms, the blood spilled on their floors, these will fade. Eventually, the Johnson name will detach from the buildings entirely. New owners will remake them in their own image. The helicopters will carry different passengers. The golf courses will host different tournaments. The rental apartments will house different families with different dreams. And somewhere, buried in legal archives and newspaper morgues and the fading memories of witnesses, the true story of the Johnson curse will wait to be rediscovered. A story of what happens when fortune smiles too broadly, when the blessing becomes the curse, when the house that money built becomes the house that money destroyed. The waves of the Raritan River still lap against the shore below Merriewold Castle. The golfers still swing their clubs at Jasna Polana. The tourists still drive past Lightning Tree Farm on their way through the Hudson Valley. But if you listen closely, beneath the wind and the bird song and the distant rumble of traffic, you might hear something else. The echo of footsteps in empty hallways, the whisper of secrets never told, the silence of people who had everything except the one thing that mattered, each other. That is the true legacy of the Johnson & Johnson mansions. Not the architecture or the art or the astounding sums of money, but the emptiness that wealth could never fill. The buildings remain. The family is gone. And the curse, whatever its nature, has done its work. A final walk through history. If you could walk through these estates one last time, what would you see? At Merrywald Castle, you would climb the limestone steps worn smooth by a century of footsteps. You would pass through the heavy oak doors into halls where the air still carries a faint chill, even on summer days. The leaded glass windows filter the light into colored patterns on the floor, patterns that shift and change as the sun moves across the sky. The secret staircases are still there, hidden behind panels that swing open at a touch. The Prohibition-era bar behind the bookshelf still holds its bottles, though the liquor evaporated decades ago. In the breakfast room, the zodiac symbols still mark the fireplace, Leo and Libra and Cancer, the signs of people who once believed the stars could protect them. Outside, the Raritan River flows past as it always has, indifferent to the dramas played out above its banks. The Rutgers Ecological Preserve surrounds the castle now, wild woods reclaiming the manicured grounds where children once played and kidnappers once prowled. A bronze sculpture stands in the courtyard, a man reading a newspaper, placed there by Seward Johnson Jr., who somehow transformed his tortured childhood into art. At Jasna Polana, you would drive through gates designed to impress visiting royalty, though royalty rarely visited. The Gary Player golf course spreads across the rolling hills, its fairways impossibly green, its hazards carefully positioned to challenge the wealthy members who pay tens of thousands for the privilege of playing here. The mansion itself looms at the end of a long drive, its neoclassical facade promising grandeur within. And grandeur is what you find, though stripped now of the art that once filled every room. The Rembrandts are gone. The Flemish tapestries are gone. The furniture that Barbara Piasecka spent decades collecting. The fireplaces she imported from European palaces. The chandeliers she hung with such care, all sold at auction after her death. What remains is architecture, beautiful but empty. The 32 bathrooms that once seemed like extravagance now seem like absurdity. The 2 bedrooms that spoke of a couple who wanted no visitors now speak of isolation. The air-conditioned doghouse, the wine cellar, the art vault, all the features that cost $30 million to build, now serve purposes their creator never imagined. Weddings take place here now, corporate retreats, charity galas. The elite of Princeton and beyond gather in rooms where Barbara Johnson once dined alone with her elderly husband, surrounded by masterpieces that could not fill the void in their lives. At Lightning Tree Farm, you would land the helicopter on the private pad, assuming you could afford such transportation. You would walk past the stables where 18 horses once stood, past the riding ring where Libet Johnson practiced her equestrian skills, past the guest houses that sheltered visitors who came to pay homage to one of New York's wealthiest women. The Greek Revival Mansion still stands, its columns still proud after 170 years. Inside, the elevator that Libet installed when stairs became difficult still operates. The home theater where she screened films still has its seats. The children's playroom with the electronic curtains still waits for children who will never come. The wine cellar is empty now. The dog room serves no dogs. The 9 bedrooms sleep no Johnson heirs. The estate that took decades to assemble was divided and sold in months. The pieces scattered to buyers who care nothing for the history within these walls. Stand on the grounds of any of these properties and feel the weight of the stories they contain. Feel the presence of people who lived and loved and suffered here. Feel the ghosts that money cannot exorcise. The Johnson family built these monuments to last forever. They used the finest materials, hired the greatest architects, spared no expense in creating homes that would announce their arrival among America's elite. They succeeded beyond their dreams. The houses will outlast every memory of their builders. The truth about inherited wealth. What lessons can we draw from the Johnson dynasty? Perhaps the most obvious is that money solves fewer problems than we imagine. Every generation of Johnsons had access to unlimited funds. They could buy any treatment, any therapy, any rehabilitation program. They could hire the best doctors, the best lawyers, the best advisors. They could insulate themselves from the ordinary struggles that most people face. And yet they could not escape the extraordinary struggles that wealth itself creates. The trusts that were designed to protect the family fortune instead created generations of people who never had to work, never had to strive, never had to prove themselves. The safety net became a trap. The golden handcuffs, as Casey Johnson called them, kept them bound to a lifestyle they could neither escape nor control. When you never have to earn money, you never learn its true value. When everything is given to you, nothing feels earned. When your name alone opens doors, you never develop the strength to push through on your own. This is the paradox of inherited wealth that the Johnsons demonstrate so clearly. Robert Wood Johnson I understood this. He started with nothing and built something remarkable. His drive, his vision, his willingness to take risks, these qualities made the fortune possible. But he could not pass those qualities to his children. He could only pass the money. The general understood it too, in his own twisted way. He worked tirelessly, even when he didn't need to. He sought challenges, even when comfort was available. But his solution was to belittle his children, to deny them his approval, to make them feel that nothing they did would ever be enough. He created resentment instead of resilience. By the time the fortune passed to the fourth and fifth generations, the connection to its origins had been severed completely. Casey Johnson never set foot in a Johnson & Johnson factory. She never had to worry about making payroll or satisfying customers or competing in the marketplace. The bandages and baby powder that made her fortune were abstractions, not realities. What was real to her was the gossip columns, the tabloid attention, the constant scrutiny that comes with a famous name. What was real was the isolation, the inability to trust anyone's motives, the knowledge that people wanted her for what she represented rather than who she was. Perhaps this is the deepest tragedy of the Johnson family. Not the deaths or the scandals or the lawsuits, but the fundamental loneliness that wealth creates. When you can buy anything, you can trust nothing. When everyone wants something from you, no one wants just you. The mansions were supposed to provide shelter from this loneliness. Instead, they became its monuments. What remains today, Johnson & Johnson, is a publicly traded company worth hundreds of billions of dollars. The family that founded it owns only a fraction of the shares. The connection between the Johnson name and the Johnson Corporation grows weaker with each passing year. The Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, established by the General and funded by his estate, has become one of the largest philanthropies in America, dedicated to improving health and healthcare. It carries his name forward in ways that honor his memory. The Robert Wood Johnson Medical School and the Robert Wood Johnson University Hospital serve patients in New Jersey, healing the sick as the company's founders once dreamed of doing. But the family itself has retreated from public view. Woody Johnson continues his work as a businessman and philanthropist, his ambassadorship now concluded. His surviving children live privately, away from the spotlight that consumed their sister Casey. The other branches of the family have scattered across the country, their connections to each other weakened by time and distance, and the accumulated grievances of generations. The mansions they built stand as the most visible legacy of the Johnson dynasty. Visitors can play golf at Jasna Polana if they can afford the membership. They can rent apartments at Merriewold if they don't mind living in the shadow of a castle with a bloody history. They can drive past Lightning Tree Farm if they happen to be traveling through the Hudson Valley. But they cannot know what these walls have witnessed. They cannot feel the presence of the people who once lived here. They cannot understand the curse that seemed to follow the Johnson fortune from generation to generation. Only the stones remember. Only the silence remains. And only the stories, passed from one generation to the next, keep the memory alive of a family that had everything except what they needed most: connection, purpose, peace. The Johnson & Johnson Company will continue to make Band-Aids and baby powder for as long as people need healing. But the family that gave the company its name has found no healing of its own. Their mansions stand as warnings to anyone who believes that wealth alone can bring happiness. Their stories remind us that the greatest fortunes cannot protect against the greatest losses. And their legacy teaches us that the houses we build matter less than the love we put inside them. The curse of the Johnson dynasty was never supernatural. It was simply human, and that makes it the saddest curse of all.